Hey guys, before we start the show, I just want to give a quick shout out to another podcast.
Welcome, dear reader, to Dispatches from the Armchair.
There's so much news, and the world moves so fast. What are the big ideas and historical forces that are really shaping our world? Go deeper than the headlines with Dispatches from the Armchair.
Well, hello there. Welcome back to the Pacific War channel. This not being a speakeasy, if you've been listening for the past few weeks, this is back to the normal grind. I'm here with, the traditional guest,
How you guys doing? Good to be back.
Mr. Economics.
That's me.
And this is going to be on an episode that came out weeks ago, so we're kind of not in the same rhythm as used to be. This is going to be on the Boxer Rebellion. So if you're audio listeners, usually it's under the term discussion. So this is back to the old format. But I think I'll take a little bit of time to kind of explain what's going on, because if you've been listening to many of these episodes, you've noticed that all of a sudden things got a bit crazy. We introduced a new series, which is the Speakeasy series, where me and a lot of my friends who might be history lovers or just random dudes, like I had a political buddy who came on and talked Canadian politics, which that episode kind of flopped a little bit, but we'll see if it picks up. It's more of an open format. We're just kind of talking goofy stuff. It could be anime, movies, freaking a lot of Godzilla. A lot of freaking Godzilla.
I can thank Ian for that one.
Yeah.
But,
Hopefully some more gaming. We haven't really talked much gaming, and I find that's kind of where we need to hit out. But needless to say, this is different from this podcast, this podcast is attached to my YouTube channel series, so these are based off of the actual episodes in a chronological order at your convenience. And if you're an audio listener, by this point, the Boxer Rebellion and the Russo-Japanese War has come out as a duo package. So we'll probably do a Russo-Japanese War podcast, God knows, weeks from now. And that'll be probably really exciting because I think I spent a full week editing that episode at this point. Yeah.
well, I mean, we're back to a whole bunch of names that we can't pronounce and a whole bunch of people that I don't know who they are. But I really enjoyed this episode, and we're finally back to a point where there's some fireworks happening. So it's kind of interesting to see. Poor China is just getting ripped apart from every angle.
You know, the famous painting, China's like a big pie, and there's all these like countries, it's all the Kaisers, the emperors cutting from it. This is the famous event that glorifies that picture. That's why it was made.
Yeah, and it's holy crap. It's hard because they're getting ripped apart from foreigners, everybody trying to take their piece of the pie, but also there's so much infighting inside, as we discussed in previous episodes. Yeah. Rebellions left, right, and center.
Always.
And you still have that giant divide of traditionalists versus, we'll call it progress or modernization. You know,
I when I was writing the script, I ran into that too, where my sources would call them the reformers, or they wouldn't never use the term liberals. I don't think it equates to liberalism, but some would call them the progressives. Like Prince Yuan, he was a progressive, but the other Prince Qing was a progressive. Prince Yuan was actually a hardcore conservative, a traditionalist. Yeah. And we can call them like that. It simplifies it.
Yeah, it comes down to that. Did they want to try and model themselves more after the European or the Western ideal and quote unquote modernize, or did they want to stick with their traditionalist values? And unfortunately, people don't see a gray area in there. They see you're either on this side of the line, you're on that side of the line.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. They really don't see a gray area. There's no one comes to the table like saying, okay, we'll do a little bit of this, but do that. No, it's full blown wars whenever these big events occur, whenever they come to the table for something like the imperial examinations that's been in Chinese history forever. They wanted to get rid of them. They wanted to do, what we see as today as like our education program, universities, degrees, like specialization. And that was like, oh my God, the traditionalists couldn't handle that.
No, we're not doing that. It's not happening.
Yeah.
And I find it very weird what we were talking about a little bit off camera is that throughout this whole rebellion and this whole time, the emperor is basically a puppet. He's there as a symbol, but he doesn't really get anything done. The strings are all being pulled from elsewhere. So
yeah, to explain to the audience, because it is going to be confusing for anyone who doesn't have not even a light bit of knowledge of Chinese history. Like, you have to have quite a bit of knowledge. The emperor in question is Emperor Guangxu. He's related to who is probably one of the most famous people in Chinese history, Emperor Dowager Jixi, and she was not actually legitimately in charge, like you said, of anything, but she was using her relative like a hostage. He was the guy that was supposed to be in charge. He was supposed to be calling the shots, but if he ever did anything out of line, as we've seen in this episode, when he was allying himself with the progressives, trying to do some reforms, she immediately put him under house arrest and just took over. She does it periodically in history.
she basically put him in a timeout. Just said, "You go sit in the corner."
Yeah, she shoved him. He went to their summer palace and she just locked him up over there. Yeah.
You go sit in the corner. Auntie's gonna fix the country now. So that's
Auntie does fix the country apparently a lot.
so that's a little bit weird. And I mean, it's unfortunate because it seems like these series of events were really kind of the nail in the coffin for the Qing Dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, the paint was on the wall, but this was a big bang to go out.
Yeah. Much. So let's dive into it a little bit. Let's talk about the episode because there are definitely a lot of different battles, a lot of places trying to be held or being fought over. So why don't you give a quick, brief thing for the audience about the episode, and then we'll talk about a few points that I picked out.
As I've done traditionally, I'll give a very brutal summarization. So if you go on YouTube right now and you look up this event, most YouTubers will cover just what is we call it the Siege of the Legations, the foreign quarters in Beijing. That actually, I mean, it's very important, of course, to the overall event, but what actually ended up happening was a series of battles that occurred within kind of the Yellow Sea region and the Shandong province and near the Beijing area, where a bunch of Western forces were trying to rescue their buddies who were stuck in the foreign quarters. So what happened was, before all this, a secret society, amongst all the other secret societies in China at this period, known as, in English, the Boxers, better said in Chinese as Yihetuan, I think I pronounced that right. Originally, and I want to make sure I say this right, it originally meant righteous and harmonious fist, Yihequan, but they changed their name eventually to be called the Righteous and Harmonious Militia because associating yourself with martial arts, not that it was actually outlawed, but it was frowned upon because a lot of secret societies in China that practice martial arts were all anti-Qing Dynasty. So if you were practicing martial arts and you were a secret society, you look like you were basically rebelling against the dynasty and they'll execute you. And they wanted to win support, from the current rulers in the Imperial Court, the Qing Dynasty and the Manchus. So these Boxers are a bunch of youthful bandits. China's going through a terrible time. We've covered the history of the 2 Opium Wars, which had unequal treaties, which depleted the country of silver, shoved opium down the throats of most of the population. And yes, opium is rampant. There's a lot of abuse, a lot of people losing their jobs because of droughts and stuff at this time and just falling into opium dens. Yeah. So population, particularly in Shandong province, is going through a really hard time. So they're going through all of this turmoil. And what do they see? Missionaries everywhere. Christian missionaries from Germany, from France, Catholics, probably some Orthodox Russians, who knows. Making churches, doing all this. Basically stamping down on farmers because a lot of farmers have lost their land and now churches are being erected where, maybe your uncle had grown something. So it's aggravating the population to say the least. But what specifically aggravates the population is bandits that are stealing from everyone because let's be honest, they're hurting and they're gonna, the youth are gonna do what they have to survive. The bandits began to convert to Catholicism because there was a bylaw in the system where you couldn't pursue anyone who was a Christian. because they had a special exemption. It was to
Yep.
protect foreigners, basically. But the Chinese who joined these Catholics could get exempt as well.
It's like a Catholic version of diplomatic immunity, which basically,
It's kind of like it's like the mafia too.
if anybody's seen Lethal Weapon 2, you know how that worked out.
So that pissed off one secret society, which was the Big Sword Society, who their purpose was to thwart banditry. I didn't go into it too much in this episode because obviously it's too much to cover, but they were particularly angry that these bandits were getting away with this. Regardless, to carry on. So, at the same time, unequal treaties, the hurting of China, the Qing Dynasty looks weak to the whole population of China because they've lost all these wars and they're extremely appeasing to the foreigners who are just stamping down on everything. Pretty much, you know, they're not officially colonizing China, even though they're trying to. They're trying to actually take territory, but more importantly, they're economically exploiting all the Chinese people. And, you know, enough was enough. Certain groups rose up and they targeted, at first, the Qing Dynasty because they wanted to change their government and, you know, force the government to do something about it. But then this began to be directed towards the Christians. The Chinese Christians first, then the foreigners. They started to attack them. And these are where the Boxers really come in. Because the Boxers, basically, they had a fervor for going after the Christian community first. When the Boxers realized that there's only so far they can get away with this, I mean, there were illiterate, unarmed peasants. There's not so much they could do. There was a lot of them. Apparently, there could have been up to 100,000 of them at one point in kind of the Shandong province. They needed allies, and who do you need? You need the government. So they wanted to get support from the Qing Dynasty, the conservatives in the court. So this is where they start to prounce around, screaming out. It's a famous Chinese phrase, which in English translates to like "protect the Qing, expel the foreigners." And they didn't go unheard. Some of the conservatives thought, "Hey, this is a great situation. Everyone hates the foreigners. They want to get rid of them, rightfully so. Maybe we can use the Boxers to our advantage and, you know, get them riled up and join them and let's attack the foreigners." Because the foreigners are, you know, they're living within all sorts of cities in China at this point in what is called foreign quarters. Specifically in Beijing is the big one, which if you watch the episode, you see there's like different sections of where they are and they're protecting. And basically the Imperial Court of the Qing Dynasty was split. We had the progressives, as we call them, and the conservatives. The conservatives, some of them said, you know, maybe we can join the Boxers, use the situation to our advantage, and maybe we can finally push the foreigners out. The vast majority of people were like, no, these are unarmed, stupid peasants. This isn't going to amount to anything, and we can't possibly win. The vast majority actually believe this, even a lot of conservatives. And we'll say the progressives were fighting to, no, let's appease the foreigners, let's put down the Boxers, quell the rebels, as they've been quelling rebellions forever.
Yeah, well, let's be real. I think there was a bit of a lack of faith in the Boxers too, because, like you said, the whole thing around them was very mystical and almost culty. In the fact, you talked about in the episode, some people believe them to be bulletproof or
they themselves too thought that,
or stuff like that. And it's, if any of you follow any MMA or martial arts stuff, Joe Rogan podcast, any stuff like that, there's a lot of discussions about the McDojo going on in the last, say, 5-6 years. And it's really funny to see, but at the same time it is kind of sad because these people rise up and it gets to a point where, yeah, they might be skilled martial artists to a certain extent, but they get to a point where they're spewing so much bullshit to people that start following them. What's worse than that is when they start to believe their own bullshit. Which
did happen. A lot of them did believe. There's initial fights where they started to... When they started to fight, let's say, not even foreigners, when they started to fight Qing forces who were armed, they thought, like, apparently there's these primary sources where they actually did think they were bulletproof and they would just human wave attack running into gunfire, and then they learned that,
they weren't bulletproof.
It didn't work.
And that might be one of the reasons why at least a few level-headed, we'll call them conservatives, thought better of... sorry, not conservatives. The other
it's both
progressives.
Sides. No one
but the more level-headed people thought, okay, maybe we're going to take a step back and not jump on this bandwagon here. But it seemed to be that those that did go into the following were very, very culty and kind of...
absolutely culty.
Kind of devoted to that, so that's a little weird. But
I could go on into like they're kind of an offset of a notorious secret society group called the White Lotus that was like anti-Qing, trying to overthrow the dynasty. It gets so deep. There's actually like another 200 years of another martial arts history where there was rebellions like 100 years before this event with like these famous martial artists who thought they were going to overthrow. It's crazy, but needless to say, during all of this, as we were talking about with the emperor and Dowager Jiji, the emperor thought that the only way to kind of like prolong the Qing dynasty at this point and keep the people happy was to do reforms. Which was right. Like, he was absolutely correct. The Wuzhou reforms was 100 days where they were trying to put in all these radical societal changes that get rid of the imperial exam, like I said. Education. It's not necessarily all westernized ideals, but just imagine they wanted to put in, like, responsible government, bureaucracies, real police forces, real military, like, self-strengthening the military, all sorts of stuff. It's a ton of stuff. And it also meant the depowering of Jiji, because she was quote unquote the unofficial kind of, I'll call her a regent. She's been known to be, she's been called a regent a lot in the sources. And it also meant that they basically had to forcefully put her under house arrest. So there was kind of a coup d'etat situation going on.
She did not like that.
So as I said in the episode, there was an attempt to put her under house arrest, and the person who was sent to kill her great advocate, who was also maybe her lover, which is like, well, old people like, well, anyways, I even made like a remark, and it's a really weird story, this whole like she might have been in love with this dude. Instead, the guy doesn't kill the guy, he just tells him of the event, and she switches on the emperor and then puts him under house arrest because, you know, she figured it out. And then she completely thwarts all the reforms he got done, kills all of the buddies he had that were promoting this. They called them like the gentlemen of Wushu, I believe, and a lot of them got executed in public. It's pretty horrifying stuff, and there's pictures of it. I couldn't put it in the episode because YouTube does not like that. And then, to complicate things further, this is all occurring with the Boxers getting more and more powerful and getting closer to Beijing. The Boxers make some attempts to kill some people near Beijing, and then the Imperial Court's kind of panicking. They're saying, like, what are we going to do? She sits down, Empress Dowager, she sits down and she listens to both sides. So as we already said, one side is like, let's use the situation, join the Boxers, and try and expel the foreigners. The other side of the aisle says, they're illiterate peasants, they can't do anything, we probably...
Not to mention, we need to modernize, we need to get with the times.
We probably can't even win, they'll just crush us. So, interestingly enough, she said this: if we quell these Boxers, it's the end of the dynasty, because they were extremely popular with the populace. This is almost kind of like a quasi-communist revolution at this point.
Yeah.
So she's like, we're damned if we do either side. She's like, if we try to expel the foreigners, we're probably going to lose. If we quell the Boxers, we're probably going to lose the dynasty. So in her mind, it all comes back to Mono. She's going to lose power. Mm-hmm. So she makes a very famous quote, and I don't have it here. It goes something along the lines, they got away too easy on the Second Opium War. Like, we ended it too early. She's like, if we're going to, if this dynasty is going to end, we're going to stand up and just die fighting. So she took the stand, and they officially, although they're secretly, they don't tell the Westerners they're officially endorsing the Boxers, they're playing coy about it, but they basically surround the legation in Beijing. They give them 24 hours. They say, all of you get out of here. And there's there's not 8 nations, but we're only going to talk about the 8 nations because the other ones are too small and insignificant. I don't even talk about them in the episode, like Portugal or Spain and shit. But
but you have France, you have Germany, you have...
Russia, Japan, Austro-Hungary, United States, Britain. So these 8 nations are basically stuck in the Legation quarters, and Maxwell, the British ambassador to China, he decides to just take command, take charge, which is pretty interesting. He's a ballsy guy, and they defend themselves with a handful, like a few hundred people, and they have all these Chinese Christians in one of the buildings in the British embassy, the British legation, basically protecting them because they're going to be killed as well because the Boxers were killing the Chinese Christians.
The Boxers were going after the Chinese first. I guess they viewed them as some form of traitor or...
Of course.
Something like that.
The Boxers started off as anti-Qing, then they switch, and then they're like with the Qing, so they're targeting Christians, and then Christians just becomes just foreigners, and it's a mishmash, and they're just going after all these people. So kind of a war has begun. So, of course, the people trapped in the legation are trying to send words to their countries to come save them. And it's called the Seymour Expedition. Eventually, an 8-nation alliance force is like a ragtag group of people that they managed to grab, goes on an expedition to try to get to Beijing. But the Boxers are being supported by the Qing forces now. Some of them, a lot of them aren't. Regional warlords and governors, like our friend Liu Hozhan or Yan Shikai, are not abiding by this. So they've basically told all their forces not to do anything. So a large part of China is not taking part in this. But Hui Muslim forces of the Qing Dynasty are on the side of the Boxers, and they basically attack Seymour as he's coming up. They cut the railway lines, and then Seymour ends up having to retreat. And as he retreats, they call for more forces to come to eventually help and save the legation. And we talked before the episode, you had a question about this kind of situation where Seymour is on the retreat.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I wanted to mention was more about the generals themselves, because if you think of almost any other nation and any other, at least modern military, orders come down from the top, they go all the way down, but it's very rare that a country is sectioned so much within itself.
Yeah.
But when you have, be it aristocrats or military leaders or anybody that controls groups of people, and especially groups of soldiers, for them to just turn around and say, no, we're not going to do that, is really a testament as to how badly divided China was.
Never unified. Historically, there's never really a point it got unified until arguably after World War II.
Which is weird because, we're getting into speculation now, but if China was fully unified back then, number one world power 100 times over.
They controlled the world economy for millennia.
Yeah, and that's being partially divided. Like I said, if they were unified, you're talking some scary kind of monster. But that's getting, very speculative anyways.
Before the episode, I was trying to explain ethnicity in China to Justin, and much like the audience, I expect there's probably a large proportion is just mostly American from the demographics I see in analytics. And there is no such thing as Chinese people. There's so many groups. There's Hakka, there's Han, there's Manchu, there's all sorts of different ethnicity and groups. Majority are Han Chinese, but at this time period for the Qing Dynasty, the Manchu are in charge, but the majority are other groups. So a lot of anti-Manchu sentiment, and it really plays into the politics and the warlordism. Like I said, these governors, we'll call them, who had these pockets in these other provinces, had the most modern militaries too. They were actually progressives who wanted the westernization. They wanted a modern military. And they just stood back and they said, this is stupid. We are not going against the Westerners. We're just going to probably suppress the Boxers, or at least pretend we're doing that. And we have no part in this.
Yeah, we're just going to stay where we are, not doing anything.
They're actually called the Mutual Protection Zoners or something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to get into, because there's two specific times you mentioned. One is, like you said, the Seymour Expedition, when he's trying to come into China to rescue. And the other one is when they attack the forts.
For the fourth time, and it's called the Fourth Battle of the Dagu Forts. It's not well known as a battle, because it gets kind of like shadowed by the other events that are going on, but it was actually pretty intense.
Yeah, but what I found weird about both these incidences is you said when Seymour's forces were attacked the first time, you said the Boxers took over 200 casualties, as did the, not the Russians, whoever was allied to the Boxers.
Oh, at this point,
the Muslims. The Muslim.
You can call them, because their ethnicity is like, we call them like Hui Muslims. They're not. I myself don't know the history today if the Uyghur Muslims are this group, but back then they would have been called the Gangzhou Force. They were Gangzhou Muslims.
Okay, so basically, you mentioned that the Boxers and the Gangzhou Muslims had both taken over 200 casualties, trying to attack Seymour's forces and stop him from coming in. And you said Seymour took maybe 7 casualties and 50 wounded, somewhere around there. Anybody who's seen the episode can rewind and correct me if I'm a little off. But it seems to me that Seymour would have won that horribly, and yet you said he retreated.
Yeah,
which I find very weird. Because if I get attacked and all of a sudden we're slapping these people around, because like you said, they're basically unarmed peasants.
Oh yeah,
Maybe the Hui Muslims were a little better armed.
no, they were terrifying. They were sharpshooters. They were armed and they were on horseback. A lot of them.
Okay.
But the overwhelming numbers are these boxers that are just kind of being like pushed in front, and they're just human waves with, and imagine like guys with pikes and stuff. Some of them had firearms, but not much. It's antiquated stuff.
Yeah. But that's my point. Is I'm kind of surprised that they would get attacked, win in such a staggering fashion, and still decide to back up.
In military terms, they never expected the railway line to get cut. They didn't expect to have to go on foot from, where were they? They were in Fang. I think it's Fang. Yeah. So they were from Tientsin.
Yeah, you said they had to march on foot.
Yeah, and then they had to go from Fanglang over to Beijing, which is actually it's a hefty march. These maps I use, they don't really show how far these places are, but they're being attacked by all these forces that have better movement in them, and they could have been encircled at any point. So from Seymour's point of view, he had to retreat, and the only place that was safe was where they had come from the last railway, which would have been Tientsin. And unbeknownst to him, Tientsin was actually going to be under attack soon by the same groups of people. It's mostly Ganju Muslims. With some boxers, although the boxers are they're like, what do you want to call them, pawns in all this? They're like the meat for the grinder kind of.
Yeah, the cannon fodder.
But he took, what was scary was they were running back onto their trains, and the Ganju were sharpshooting them. So they couldn't see the enemy, and every day they would be attacked, and they would be setting firecrackers at night, and they wouldn't let them sleep. So every day, his men would get worse condition. So he knew it was a terrible situation. Same thing they do in the legation quarters. I couldn't really emphasize it enough, but they didn't let these people sleep. It's crazy. Like, people probably thought I was joking. I used one image of like these fireworks going off, but the emphasis was supposed to be that fireworks are going off every freaking night to make it sound like gunfire and stuff.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Well, it's not a bad idea if you're trying to, if the enemy's holed up somewhere and you basically want to starve them out of there. You drain all resources. You drain food, water, sleep, supplies, whatever you can. But yeah, and the other battle was, to get back to what we were talking about, is the Dagu forts, where, and again, we're going to get into something we've talked about in previous episodes, but where you say that they took heavy, heavy losses while trying to take the Dagu forts, and yet they still won. Where people holding the Dagu forts had almost nothing, but they were like, well, we won, but we're just going to leave and let you have this anyways.
I'm a little bit guilty in this one. I don't specialize in Chinese history per se, and this is actually all out of my territory. It's the Pacific War Channel, as I'll say to people. When I was reading the secondary sources, I don't even know I had primaries for this one, they were attacking the forts. They took heavy casualties as they're, charging up the mud and trying to take the forts. From what I've learned, especially with the battles over the Dagu forts, because this happened in the Opium Wars too.
Yep.
You don't take a lot of casualties as the defender.
This is going back to the days of the shitty cannons.
Yep. It's the same place.
Yeah.
Those are the same forts.
That's what I said. This is going back a ways. We've been here before, people.
The sources say light casualties. So, and that's pretty unusual in these battles, because usually the Chinese really, the casualty numbers are horrifying. I think what ended up happening, as I mentioned in the episode, I was saying to you, so the forts are located on different sides of the opening of the riverway. So when they took these forts, I assume they killed a few of the guys over here, and then most of them had retreated by the time the guys got onto the island there. When they started to shoot at the other forts, all those guys had left, because they didn't shoot back. So that's why I believe that they didn't have many casualties. I think they all just fled. And
so maybe they just saw they were going to be overrun and took off.
Another indicator that they ran, I mentioned in the episode, there was a few German-made war vessels that were in the port around the Dagu forts, and the Alliance just all of a sudden ran right over to them and just boarded them and took them. They didn't even fight back. So it doesn't seem like the Chinese forces were...
Seems like they were unprepared almost.
Yeah, it's you have to remember, just like the governors who said no to the orders to fight the foreign legation, like a lot of these people, the Dagu forts, like who's to say their officers aren't just like no, let's get out of here.
Peace.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, that's speculating at this point, but would be a fair argument, I think.
If I did an episode on this battle only, I'm sure I would have delved into it deeper and found like very specific information. It's on me. It's in my bad. I didn't go too specific into it, but
Well, again, this is a compilation of so many different rebellions and small battles. We're not going to delve, shoulders deep into every one of them. But I just thought it was weird at first, hearing the numbers and reading the stats that you put out, and I'm like, that kind of doesn't make sense. You don't concede a game when you're up by 10 runs, but I kind of get that.
Just you wait. The next episode, and it's a doozy because I crammed every like I'm gonna be the only guy on YouTube who did the full Russo-Japanese War. No one has done the full one. I'm saying this honestly because I watched all of them. I did every single battle. The Japanese are fighting the Russians. The Japanese never have more numbers than the Russians. The Japanese, every single battle is offensive. The Russians are on the defensive. The Russians withdrew every single fight. It's incredible how sometimes this happens.
So let's get back into the taking of the Dagu forts, because this is something else I thought was very interesting, and this is starting to be a pattern we're seeing in China's history, I guess I would say.
Yeah, those Dagu forts just go down.
Well, not just that, but it's the misinformation of basically the guys that were holding the Dagu forts going, we won a great victory.
Yep.
And kind of omitting the fact that, well, we still gave up the forts anyways, but we killed more of them than they killed of us, so we're awesome.
You have to imagine she got like a piece of paper that's like, we killed this many of them and we lost an insignificant number. It was a great victory. And she's like, oh, that's swell, nice, we're gonna win this. And
not realizing that they don't have those forts anymore.
P.S. ... They have the Dagu forts. They're landing like 50,000 guys, and they're gonna come soon. like
I don't understand. Okay, obviously we're not talking about a modern era. It's not like they can send an email or they have satellite images. But holy shit, has misinformation been kind of a thorn in China's side in a lot of these major conflicts?
Would they have had telegram in the China? I don't know if the Qing had telegram. Anyway, needless to say, they had messengers of some sort. I thought they should have had it, and they probably did.
Yeah, but this basically comes down to people just bullshitting to save their own ass from the hangman's noose.
It's the messenger syndrome, especially in the Qing Dynasty. It's every episode I've done up to this point. It's the same story. They go back to the emperor and they're like, "Hey, we won a great battle," and the emperor's like, "Oh, that's great." And then by the end of the war, the emperor's like, "What the hell is going on?" It's like, "Yeah, we were lying. We've lost every battle. We're gonna die. Peking is under attack."
That's so stupid, but
yeah,
it seems to be a pattern, So that definitely didn't help them at all.
To conclude the summary of all of this brutal summarization, so a larger force, Seymour eventually he gets to Tientsin. There's a huge, terrifyingly bloody battle where the Japanese beat the hell out of the Qing forces in Tientsin, and it's bloody as hell. They take it over. More forces come after the Dagu Forts battle. Becomes the Ghastly Expedition, we call it, and that's like 50,000 men strong. It's a much bigger force. 8-nation alliance, all these countries coming to save the legations who are under siege for 55 days. You would imagine that the foreign legations would have crumbled, and they should have. As I said in the episode, what actually ended up happening is the people that were sympathetic towards not joining the Boxers were actively thwarting the siege. So basically, the only people really doing anything were the Boxers and the Gangju Muslims. The other side, the Peking field force, as we call them, and the progressive officers, particularly Rong Yu, he's actively not allowing artillery to be placed. He's not giving ammunition. He's giving food to the legation secretly. He's doing everything basically to help behind this.
At one point you said he was even hiding artillery or something like that.
From the Muslim general. Well, sorry, the general of the Muslims actually isn't a Muslim. He was a Han Chinese. He was demanding this group of artillery from Ronglu, and it would have broke the walls. They would have easily took it all over, and Ronglu would say, "Oh, I'm gonna get it next week." The guy is like
the check's in the mail. It's coming.
Yeah. He was just bullshitting him, and no one was the wiser.
Basically, just stalling for time, waiting for.
Yeah, he's actually the guy that saved the legations, arguably. So the legations never fall. The Ghastly Expedition eventually gets there, and everyone just scatters. And Gigi has to run away. She eventually comes back into power. Gongju comes back into power, but the Qing Dynasty, as a result of this is the nail in the coffin. And what ends up happening, I didn't go into it too much in the episode, was it's called the Boxer Protocol, and it's just it's like a treaty, like all the wars that are lost. But this time they were facing an 8-nation alliance, and a bunch of other nations just came to the table at the last minute who didn't partake in this, like Sweden, Norway, Portugal, and stuff.
You owe us something too, and it's
They all got a piece of the pie.
We are going back to, not that it wasn't justified, but we are going back to the 100 years of embarrassment, or whatever it is that you call it.
Yeah, it's 100 years of humiliation.
And sorry, I apologize. 100 years humiliation and the unequal treaties, where now we get into a little bit of the financial reparations that China had to go through, and holy crap,
It's, I think, the worst that the Qing Dynasty got. It was, and I had to get the figures here because I am not a finance guy.
Yeah, what did you rate exactly here?
450 million taels of silver. That's about 18 tons worth, and that's going to equal to about an estimated 333 United States dollars million to be paid over 30
United States dollars million.
I said that like a champ.
This is why I cover the economics and he covers the history.
It's stonks, people.
Yeah, okay.
To be paid over 39 years.
Yeah, so basically, this nation who's crumbling politically, we've already talked about in previous episodes how their economy is absolute crap because of all the money lost during the Opium Wars and the Opium Crisis, trying to mop that up.
And the opium trade continuing.
Yeah, but also a lot of their trades have gone elsewhere, like we showed in previous episodes. Be it tea, silk, all this stuff they're being overtaken by many countries all over the place. Foreign traders are just kicking down the doors, basically setting up shop in China's backyard without China being able to do anything about it.
Oh God!
To quote a bad TV show, but basically everybody's shitting on China's head, and they're supposed to say thanks for the hat.
I just realized you were not in the discussion episode for the episode before this one, which was the Sino-Japanese War.
I missed that one.
The only thing really to know is like China lost its influence in Korea, so business-wise, it just lost its main kind of source of revenue that it was selling to, because it would, kind of abuse Korea a lot, for lack of better words. So.
Yeah, so it's and now all of a sudden they have to pay out this huge, for lack of a better term, we'll call it reparations check, and even though it is over time, this is just a stupid amount of money that they basically have to put into the pockets of the people that are taking them over and collapsing their political system right now.
And this is the thing that stroked my interest. This is why I wrote this down. So in the end, they have to pay us for 39 years, right? They ended up paying a lot of it in gold, which actually, for some reason, I don't understand why, it increased the interest rate charge on it. By the end of it, when they finally paid this all off, the actual payment ended up being something amount reaching, it says 1 billion taels worth.
Yeah, so more than two times the original amount.
Payment ended December the 31st, 1940. For all those wondering, during World War I, since China declared war on Austria-Hungary and Germany, they knocked that part off, though. They stopped paying them. So at least there's that for them. Whoop-de-doo.
And if we look in here, okay, Germany was 20%, so that's a huge...
Oh, yeah, so they have to pay percentages per country, too. So, Russia...
Germany was the second biggest, so that was a little bit, mind you, by the time you get to World Wars I and II, you're at the tail end of this payment, so they've already paid 75%.
God, I don't have it here. I think... No, for World War I, before they cut it off, they had paid something like 30% of what they owed them.
At least.
So they at least cut off, a good chunk got cut off.
A good chunk of what they owed Germany, but, let's agree that Austria and whatnot is insignificant. Germany's the only one of those that really mattered.
Yeah, but Russia is 29%, that's the biggest one. France 16, Britain 11. It's funny that Britain allowed France to get more than them. That doesn't usually happen. Japan 8, even though Japan did the most of the fighting, arguably. United States 7%, Italy 7%, Belgium, who had no part in this, 2%, Austria-Hungary 1%, who was part of this, the Netherlands like 0.17.
Yeah, well, that's the
Spain,
thing.
like,
These are just countries looking for a little peaky handout, you know.
yeah, they're grabbing.
Norway, Sweden,
I think
Portugal,
that's cheeky
Spain.
as hell that Sweden and Norway just got in there. Like they have not been relevant empires for a long time at this point. But whatever.
The one that surprises me a little bit is the Netherlands. Even though they weren't directly involved in this conflict, we've seen how active they were in trade and marketing, merchanting in this time period.
They have a.
So I'm kind of surprised they didn't get their foot a little bit more into that door. But
they were weak at this point, but later on, just in the time of World War II, Dutch East Indies, they had all the oil.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's kind of my point. If anybody was going to get in a money deal like this, I'd figure the Dutch East India Trading Company. But it's, that ended up being, like we said, as far as I'm concerned, kind of the nail in the coffin, because the country's falling apart politically, socially, and now on top of that, financially, it's just the walls are coming down, the roof's caving in.
Yeah, I think a great way to actually end this episode is what I'm not able to really do in the episodes, talk about the long-term consequences. I kind of just allude every episode to, like, this is going to start the next war, or this is going to have this effect, which will lead to the Pacific War. But this time, this is actually pretty important. So the Boxer Rebellion, this is funny to say, it ceased the colonization of China officially. So all the Western powers realized after this event that they were not going to actually take territory. They might get concessions, like people know that in Shanghai, for example, there was an international concession and there's people and there's foreign legations. That's fine and dandy, it's economics, whatever, but they're not taking any foreign territory, except for kind of Britain with Hong Kong. Oh, that's the one that's like the outlier.
We're not taking territory, we're only occupying
Yeah.
it, using it for trade and
but
changing it to Christianity.
They finally realized that they couldn't deal with the population. The easiest way was to deal with the ruling dynasty. So they, in their thinking, were like, okay, from this point on, you know what, Asia's probably more in the hands of Japan or Russia at this point. They're both the contenders. And they kind of stepped back. And they allow them to have greater spheres of influence. They're not out of the game or anything. They're still trading and exploiting. But they have taken their foot out of the pool, so to say. And Japan has really pressed in, but Russia has even more so. So this is what kind of leads into the Russo-Japanese War. The whole time this is happening, all these countries sent all these men to, rescue these people. Except Russia put, like, 1 million men into Manchuria under the guise it was protecting railway stations that it was building, the East Chinese Railway. Russia told everybody, specifically told Japan, as soon as this crisis is over, the 1.5 million troops that we put in Manchuria are going to leave. Because Japan is really not cool about that. This is their sphere of influence. This is pretty threatening.
Sounds like a whole lot of horseshit to me, but...
Yeah, they don't leave. This event stops in 1901. By 1903, they're saying again, by 1903 we're going to leave. They don't leave. Japan is directly threatened by this. Then, during all of this, at the same time, in Liaodong, the peninsula, Port Arthur is given over as a lease to Russia, which is the same port that Japan had arguably won in the Sino-Japanese War, and then they told them that they had to leave.
Yeah.
All of this brushes Japan the wrong way, but Japan is in no situation to fight Russia. Russia at this time, people might not notice it. The Russian Empire is actually terrifying. They have the biggest army. They have a pretty large navy, and it's scary. But
pretty ahead of, well, not ahead of their times, but very stocked up weaponry wise as well, I think.
Inefficient, big numbers, not good commanders, a lot of corruption. Anyways, but Japan tries to negotiate with Russia, and Japan even makes a pretty big compensation. Okay, we're going to control Korea. That's going to be our sphere of influence. And then you can have Manchuria. Just don't come over here. And we're going to respect each other. Russia immediately says to them, no, we're going to cut this little line, the 39th parallel in Korea, and we're going to do what we want in Korea, and you just don't come up here. So Japan secretly attacks them and then declares war the next day, which is cheeky because it's what they do in Pearl Harbor. And Japan beats Russia. The biggest underdog story of all time, shocks the entire world. But anyways, Boxer Rebellion.
That's an episode that I'm interested to get into. So
it's a crazy episode. But so the Boxer Rebellion, it's the nail in the coffin though as far as the Qing Dynasty is concerned. All this other stuff that's happening in China is against their will. They have nothing to do with it. The Chinese population is watching as the Russians and the Japanese are fighting within their country, and they're just kind of like dwiddling their thumbs. Like, we can't do anything about it because our government is so ineffective. Government is in shambles. There's going to be about 50 different revolutions that are going to occur between like 1900 to 1911. And this is all going to eclipse with the actual end of the Qing Dynasty, which is the Xinhai Revolution, or the 1911 Revolution, in which I won't say who, but a certain amount of people in history are going to take over. And they're going to form the first Republic of China and actual attempts at, I'll call it democracy, but not really.
yeah.
And actually a key player, Yuan Shikai, is going to be arguably the big winner in all of this. So the Boxer Rebellion in a lot of ways was kind of just the big bang to go out on. And it's almost as if Dowager Empress Cixi kind of knew it, because she like in her famous quote, if we're gonna go out, let's go out fighting at least. And, save our face. Because I think she says in the quote, she like, how can I even see my ancestors in death if I didn't try to win, you know?
Yeah. Well, going back to that traditionalist, a lot of her arguments had to do with the ancestors and things like that.
Yeah,
that's why they didn't want trains, because the noise would wake up ancestors. And
a real quote from her, yeah.
Which I mean is, if you have those beliefs, that's fine. But at the same time, it's, you see this wolf knocking at your door, and your argument was to go out fighting, but with no real plan, no strategy, no anything, and it just didn't work out well. So
it's really sad to say. The Qing Dynasty had, like, particularly for the Sino-Japanese War, they purchased all of the necessary battleships to be able to win. I mean, they dwarfed the Japanese, but ineffective Navy officers, corruption within the dynasty. They were basically screwing up the armaments. They were cheaply making, the shells for the ships. So most of the shells were empty when they showed up for the war, and the officers had no idea. They actually had people scrambling to open them up to check before they would launch them, and it's crazy. There is a famous saying in for Chinese people that a lot of the officers would find that the shells were just concrete blocks. Like, they had a casing, there's concrete inside just to make it seem like there was something in it.
Oh boy.
All sorts of craziness. So yeah, the Qing Dynasty is coming to an end, and you'll get to see the Russo-Japanese War, and then after that, the official end will come with the Xinhai Revolution.
Well, I can't wait to do the Russo-Japanese War. That's going to be a fun one, I think. So.
I know people, for the audio listeners, this is coming ensemble, so they're going to get the Boxer Rebellion, and then it's followed up by the Russo in the same package. And I apologize to the audience. I'm going to get comments when it comes out on YouTube. I tried to jam-pack as much as I could in an episode, so I literally spoke like I was Ben Shapiro, like at 2x speed. It's rough and jarring, and I realized after, like, I should have.
Can't wait to hear all those names pronounced at double speed, and
it's at double speed,
and me trying to follow what the hell is happening. I might have to watch a few times.
And it's going to be an exciting one, because I already got hit by some media producers who didn't like me using clips from their many series and movies and stuff, because I jam-packed this one with war footage. This is like the biggest one I've ever done.
Yeah. Well, just one thing I wanted to throw out there. I know we've said this in previous episodes, but if anybody has any specific questions or things they want us to delve in deeper in these discussions, feel free to leave a comment on the YouTube video itself, because it gives us more of an idea of what people want to hear too. Seriously. Or if there's anything that needs more expansion or more detail. I mean,
particularly you audio listeners, there is no way to gauge anything. I just see the downloads, which are good, or we're doing quite well on all the main podcast servers and everything, but I would love to hear from you. So if you can just go on that YouTube channel, subscribe, give me those sweet subscriptions so I can feed my 2 little hungry parrots, and let us know what you want to hear, and let us know about the Speakeasies, because it's kind of a venture, and I don't know if it's going to stay or not. We're just exploring.
Yeah.
All right, this has been the Pacific War channel that covers 19th century Chinese history almost exclusively at this point. Over and out.
Take care, guys.